to Chad Silversmithing. I appreciate you coming to my channel. Thanks for visiting. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button before you head out, I'd appreciate it. That helps a lot. I wanted to thank all my subscribers. We just passed 2,000 subscribers recently, and that makes me very happy, and I'm pleased that it's growing and that people are finding this stuff useful. I appreciate your support. I wanted to thank my patrons over on Patreon for their support as well. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, there's a couple of different ways you can do that in the video description. But let's get to the project. Today, I wanted to make a locket. To be honest with you, I've never made a locket before. I've done lots of hinged things, but this time I wanted to make a locket. So I have a really pretty stone. It's a piece of Red Creek Jasper that I've been sitting on for a long time. And I'm going to make kind of a big locket, and it's a little bit non-traditional. So I hope you like it, and let's get started. I wanted to show you the stone that I have here. It's a real nice round, make sure you can see this here, real nice round Red Creek Jasper, which comes from China. Sometimes, what are they? Cherry Creek Jasper, I've also heard it called, but most times I hear it called Red Creek Jasper. It's one of my favorite jaspers. It's got all sorts of cool patterns in it sometimes, and this one's no different. This one looks to me kind of like a impressionist painting, something I don't know, Monet or something might have painted. It looks like a Monet to me. So I think it's pretty, and I think it'll make a good front part for the locket. The thing that's different about this locket is I'm going to hinge it on the bottom, and the bail itself is going to be the thing that holds it closed. So in order to open it, you'll have to take it off of the chain to do that. So I'm going to have 3 loops, that one on this side, 2 on this side that it goes between, and then you run the chain through it, and that keeps it closed. So, and then the hinge will be on the bottom here. So I think it'll be relatively straightforward, with the exception if you've never done a hinge. Hinges can be a little challenging sometimes. The materials I think I'm going to use, and it may change as we go because I've never done this, I think I'm going to try and get by with 26 gauge sheet for the back of this thing here, even though it's big. And maybe on the other side too, with the idea that I need to save weight on this one, because otherwise it's going to be a very heavy pendant if I start doing real thick sheet. To create the cavity in between the two, I'm going to use some 14 gauge square wire, so there's just enough space to put a picture or something in there. And other than that, I don't think it should be too difficult. One thing I'm a little concerned about is with hinges, you always have a series of tubes or holes that you run a pin through. And this one, I just have to make sure that I get them all lined up straight. So I don't think that'll be too hard. I think we should be able to do that okay. So we'll see. It'll be a fun project, and I'm looking forward to it. So to start with, I think let's make a bezel for this great big stone here. 40 millimeter stone-ish, 41 maybe, somewhere in that size range. And so I can even find a corner here. I think I can probably get it right off of here. But first let's do the bezel. I think for this one I'm going to use a little bit thicker bezel here. This is 26 gauge fine silver bezel strip, and it's 3/16 inch tall. Okay. I think I said I'm going to use 14 gauge wire to build space in there. And for the pin, I have a little piece of 14 gauge round that's floating around here somewhere. So I don't think I'm going to need too much more. I'll probably use 14 gauge square for the little things up top, if not 14 gauge round. I'm not sure yet. So let's make the bezel first. Something this big, it shouldn't be too hard to hit the size on the nose. They're pretty close. Here's the old trick for doing a bigger bezel. When they're big like this, they're kind of floppy and hard to get these two ends to stay together. So if you turn it into a rectangle like this and then dimple the bottom, it makes the overall thing a little bit springier. So you can push them past each other a couple of times. And then they'll really be pushing towards each other. So as long as you get them lined up, they'll stay pushing together nicely. So I find it a little bit easier to get these bigger ones lined up there. So with a bezel this big, you really want both sides of this to hit temperature at the same time, which in my case, since I use hard silver solder, it's 1450 or so Fahrenheit. And I want both sides of that gap to hit that temperature at about the same time, otherwise it'll jump to one side or the other. So I kind of try and heat it pretty rapidly around the whole thing, so that both sides will hit temperature at about the same time. There we go. You get a nice puddle across the gap instead of having it jump to one side or the other. A lot of people ask me in the comments about why I make them rectangular, and I just find it easier, mostly, to place a piece of solder on the outside if it's got a horizontal plane, as well as making it easier to get those ends lined up. So, there's no requirement to do that, but I find that to be useful. So steering it towards an oval. What was I thinking? I think that looks pretty decent. If you have seen my videos before, probably have told you that when you're doing a big bezel like this, the hardest part to get up to temperature is the piece on the bottom because it's sitting down on the pad. Many people use tripods, which have mesh bottoms on them so they can get underneath them. Those are good to have around if you have one of those. However, one of the reasons people, when they're beginners, melt their bezels pretty frequently when they're doing something like this is because that is hard to get up to the 1450 degrees, whereas the one on top here is exposed to the flame pretty readily, and so that one too soon gets up to that temperature before the bottom sheet does, and so you end up melting your bezel before it ever sticks down. So what I usually do if I have a really big one that I'm having trouble getting up to temperature is I get the solder position where I want it to be. And I'm going to
going to throw a gratuitous amount of solder in here.
And then what I usually do is, if you heat that flux that's in there up a little bit, it's a little gooey. And so when I shove these over against the side, there's a tendency to kind of stay there then. Kind of glues them down in place. It comes in handy in a lot of situations, the stickiness of flux. Sometimes it's a disadvantage when you're trying to move something and everything keeps sticking to your pick or whatever, but in this case, what it allows is if I want to, say, for instance, get the bottom hot without exposing the bezel to some flame like I was talking about, you can tip it up like this, pump some heat into it from the bottom like that, to the point where the solder starts flowing. You set it up here and then start heating everything. Sometimes, if it's not in contact, that solder won't wick around. So you want to try and push it down just slightly. You got to be super careful when you're doing this though. The reason it's pulled away a little bit is because I'm using such thin sheet to the back here with a big bezel. So under the heat sometimes it warps a little bit. But if you real gently push it down with your pick while the solder is liquefied, it should encourage it to wick along and seam the rest of the way. Most of the time that works pretty well. So if you use a little bit thicker sheet, it won't warp, but it'll also become even more massive, so it'll be harder still to get that bottom sheet up to temperature. So you'd still have to heat it from the bottom or use a tripod or whatever probably to do it without melting your bezel. But also if you're using one of those little butane torches, little handheld butane torches, or even like a plumber's propane torch, you likely when you start to get to bezels of this size, it's going to become harder and harder to produce enough heat to get the entire piece up to temperature like it needs to be. So you might want to keep that in mind if you're going to start up a big project. Okay, so I think now I'm going to go ahead and trim this off. Okay, I was going to originally leave a lip around the outside, but I think as big as this is, I'm going to make an executive decision and just do it the same size as the bezel itself. Sometimes it's nice to frame things in silver, but for this one we're just going to, the stone speaks for itself kind of. If you're doing something like this, you want to make sure you got a good seam all the way around, otherwise it'll look a little amateurish. So. So I think I'm going to start the next step. I'm going to make a circle. I'm going to trace this, and then I'll take a piece of square wire and I'll make a loop that fits exactly that same. That's exactly that same size, and that'll be the basis for our back. Basic rule, if you want to know how big a piece of wire to make the circumference of a circle, would be pi times diameter equals circumference. So pi is a little more than 3, so you can kind of estimate. If I cut it about right there, I'll have plenty. This has been your math lesson for the day. So with square wire, when you try to bend it, it always tries to twist on you. It's because it's trying to stretch out the outside edge and compress the inside edge, and it tries to find an easier path, and twisting is the way that it finds that easier path. So when you're doing it, you can kind of take time and make adjustments as you go. to minimize that a little bit. You stop periodically and look at how, if the flat side is still staying flat or if it's trying to tilt up on you. I imagine it'll be trying to tilt up on you. Let's see how we're doing on the sides. That was a pretty close guess. I'm thinking if I go a little bit, just a little bit big, then I can file it down to exact size if it's not quite perfect. So I have enough room to work with this square wire, I think. Okay, so these guys all neatened up and I'm going to solder them together. It's been my experience. It's easier to solder things. They're straight onto each other. It also helps me to see how evenly I file. I made this a while back when I was looking for something that was kind of between a bracelet mandrel and a ring mandrel, just so sometimes I need to make something circular that's kind of in a mid-range size. And so I made a little hardwood one. We're a little too big, I think. Okay, well that tells me just about where it needs to go, so let's shoot for there. Pretty good. Okay, so this is going to be soldered down onto another piece of sheet. However, if it's going to be capable of holding a picture, it needs to have kind of a lip in there. So I was thinking, I don't think it has to be a huge lip, but if we file it at an angle inwards like that on one side, that'll provide that kind of recessed area for a picture to slide into. So we'll try that. And I think this may be a little too time consuming to do with the jeweler's saw, unless you really are feeling you want to have some therapeutic filing. So I may use the Dremel a little bit, just with one of those abrasive white whales. Just grind it away. Okay, so I did a little bit of filing on the inside so it has a taper, and then I did a little dremeling to smooth it out. Now I want to make sure the bottom is nice and flat. I already kind of went around and manually flattened it, but now I'm going to file it so it's flat. Okay, so basically I got a washer, but it's got a taper going, kind of at this angle like that, down there, and so that'll allow for the picture to stay in there a little bit. So we'll find another spot on here. If this was a smaller piece without a stone, I probably would use a little bit thicker sheet. I'm just trying to keep the weight down. Some people don't seem to mind a pretty heavy necklace. Other people, it drives them crazy. So I think for me, a big pendant hanging like that would kind of bother me. But then I don't really like to wear jewelry at all. So I think a way to get a nice neat seam would be if I sweat soldered a little bit of solder on the underside of this first. So I think I'm going to do that, and then we'll flop it over on here and just heat the whole thing till it flows again. Sometimes this thin sheet, like I said, warps a little bit, so you put a little pressure to kind of get it to sit down on there nice. Now the solder is in the right place already, so I should just need to heat this thing up to the flow point again. I'm going to put a little bit on the outside edge here just to make sure we got a seam all the way around. I'm going to be trimming off this excess on the outside anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Could have technically just leaned it up against the side like this. Okay, I'm going to trim this off. Clearly not perfectly round, but I think if I line it up about like that's pretty good. Maybe I should make some marks on it while I can here. How did I lose that marker that fast? It doesn't seem possible. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure this side's pretty flat as well.
Okay, I'm trying to kind of figure out where I'm going to put the hinge now. So I think anywhere in that range would be okay.
I have some tubing here. It's the kind that fits 14 gauge perfectly, because I was going to use 14 gauge as the pin for the hinge.
So, and here's what I think. I think that in order to make this hinge work well, I need to solder a piece of 14 gauge square wire there, 14 gauge square wire there, so that I'm capable of filing a nice flat surface there, so that I have a flat plane to solder our hinge to. So I'm going to be soldering it right there. What I'm doing here is I'm going to be soldering this right to the edge here. Like I said, then it'll give me some room to where I can file a flat spot so that we can lay that tube on a nice flat surface. Which, if you try and do it on a curve like this, you're going to have to curve your pin and it's going to look kind of amateurish. So let's try and see if we can't fix that problem here. Yes, that's what I want. Since I want it to be kind of up at the top here and I have the thickness of the sheet there as well, turn it upside down to solder it on there. That's pretty close. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. Even if that's not centered, I can trim these down either way. And that should give us a nice flat surface if I file it off to that point.
So let's do that.
I think what I'll do with this one is I'll keep filing that down a little flatter, and then I'll actually mount it on top of this platform that I've created there. That'll make it so that I can open it. Should swing up that way. So that's kind of what I want. Kind of playing this one by ear, but it seems like so far things are working out okay. Okay, I guess we're going to do a little sawing now. Okay, so I have a new saw, so I'm kind of excited about that. My other one was terrible. So I think I'm going to cut one about the length of that flat area that I just created. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just trying to do it with my hands crossed over each other. Try and find a pretty flattish spot here. Solder it right there. And you really, when you're doing a hinge, you don't want any solder to flow into the inside of the hinge. And this is one of the few times I ever use easy solder. I use hard solder for everything, and then when I solder the pin in, that'll be the only time I use easy solder. So, but right now we're just going to use regular hard solder. So I think I'll probably pick some on here, and then I'll just butt it up against there after I get everything fluxed. One thing I've learned over the years is you don't want to pick these things up with tweezers when they're hot, because they'll crush pretty easily. So if you pick it up with something else, get off of there. The other thing is there's a ton more mass in this thing than there is in this thing, and so you're going to want to make sure that you keep the heat off of the tube until the very end. I'm going to try and pick this up and see if it's straight. I want it to be straight. Pretty straight in that dimension. That looks pretty good, so I think I'm going to go ahead and cool that off. So you can probably see where we're going with this. Got this platform here that I can solder the center tube onto, and then we'll run a pin through it. So basically, so I have this lined up how I want it. Think about that wide maybe for the middle hinge part. So I'll just cut that out with the saw. Okay, so I sawed it out. It's not probably perfect, but I've got these lined up now. And I need to mark where the boundaries of the tube that go on the bottom are going to be, so I can solder it on in the right place. And it's got to be sticking out a little bit from that edge, so so now it extends out a little bit more. Let me, the thing I didn't do is smooth this out in here after I sawed it out. So the piece of tube I want needs to be sticking back just a little bit. So I'm grabbing another little piece of tube. Okay, I'd rather do it just slightly bigger than the gap here so I have some room to work with. Okay, I'm gonna cool this off just to see how close we are.
I think we're within the, yeah, I think that'll do. We just got to get things cleaned up a little bit. So I think I'm gonna throw these in the pickle for a little bit. Take a little break.
And we'll come back and I'm gonna put the veil thing on top, solder the pin in, and we'll let it pickle the rest of the way, polish it, and then we'll set the stone. Now I just have to file those down a little bit on either side. Should be good. Now we're starting to talk. Okay. Sometimes it's a little bit of a tight fit, but okay. So now we're talking here. Well, the trick is going to be for me getting these straight across from here, because that's always my hardest part, is lining things up. I think that's pretty good, actually. So here's what I'm thinking on this one. So I need one coming off of here and one coming off of either side here. So I can just cut two straight pieces of square wire pointing up, and then I'll curve them around so that they park in front of the side of this. And this one I will also curve around so it's at the same level as those two loops, so that you can just run the chain right through them. I think what I need to do on this one, I need to solder it upright. Let's do it just like that. See what happens. I'm going to do this kind of like that. I'm going to have to do a little estimating here. How much to cut off of that. This is just going to require a little bit of hand shaping. I did forget one thing though. Since I am soldering to the base of this little thin sheet and this bezel here, This is structurally not very sound. So, because I'm going to be putting some tag board behind this, I'm going to be lifting the stone up just a little bit. So, if I put in a little bit of wire along the top edge, right in there, that'll give it just a little bit more structural integrity. Hold it kind of. Let's see if we can't get that to solder in real quick. And I'll finish that with that. It'll be less likely to distort the bezel if I finish it than after that. Where did that go? Oh, there you are. That should be a little bit sturdier there so I can mess with it a little more. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and solder that. I'm not super pleased with its placement, but I'm going to just live with it, I think. Okay, so I just got to pick a little bit in there. Okay, so I'm going to heat that one up. Throw it in the pickle. This one up just as good. Alright, let it sit for a bit. I wanted to tell you something before I pickled this again, but I realized that I had these guys sitting way far apart, so I just basically, I pulled them off and I scooted them closer together and resoldered them on so that it's not going to have a lot of play back and forth this way, because I think if I had left it wide like that, it would have gone back and forth quite a bit. So I think this keeps it pretty much tightened up now. So now I'm going to go ahead and let it pickle some more. Let's make sure my pin here is pretty straight. So I think I'm going to solder it this way, but I'm going to use a little bit of easy solder. This is one of the few times, like I said, where I'm going to use anything other than hard solder, because I really don't want any of the solder flowing in and seizing up on this center tube there. So I'm going to solder it just right there where the tube and the pin come together on the outside edge, and then on that outside edge there as well. So I just need to get a little bit of solder to hold the pin in place, and then we'll be good. I'm actually going to put a little flux on the table. I usually chew up the end of a toothpick to give it kind of a more of a brush-like bottom. So I really don't want to get this side hot at all, because the two that I want the solder to attach to are attached to this one here. So I'm going to heat it up just a bit here. I picked up a little flux there. Pick up a piece of solder. Heat this generally, but then I'm going to move in and focus on this. Stuck with the one pin, but being the person who seeks out trouble, I'll go ahead and do the second one. That's what I was hoping to see. Okay. So now I'm going to heat this up and really pickle it, and then we'll clean it up. I'll probably polish most of it, and then I'll set the stone in front of you, and then I'll put a nice picture at the end of the video. I got it mostly polished up. I may need to do a little final polishing after I'm done here, but I wanted to go ahead and set the stone. I put a couple of pieces of tag board behind it just to get it to the right height. If you've never watched my videos, I just use my chain nose pliers to do this, but many people use some other tools like bezel pushers and burnishing tools, and those are fine. Everybody does their thing their way. So I'm just pushing pretty much straight in to get rid of any gaps. Now I'm going to start rolling it over the top while I'm pushing down pretty hard with my thumb here. Okay, now I'm going to burnish that top edge, which is rubbing the top edge right where it meets the stone with the smooth outer part. Again, I think that stone is fabulous. That just looks like an impressionist painting to me. So, but now it's got a little secret compartment behind it. Put a picture of somebody in there. Put, you could keep a copy of your manifesto if you have one. Some kind of little saying that you like or something. But yeah, I think that came out pretty good. I was overall pleased.
Okay, that was my version of a locket. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to hit the like button before you leave, and I'd love to have you subscribe if you haven't before. Lots of new content coming out here. I put out about 3 videos per week, and I think that based on the comments that I'm getting, people are finding them useful. So whether you're a beginner or someone with a little bit more experience who just wants some ideas stimulated, sign up. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So thanks again for watching. Happy silversmithing. Take care.